Hello and welcome to the third Traceability in the Leather Supply Chain webinar hosted by ILM. My name is Martin Ricker and I am the Content Director of leading leather industry business information brand International Leather Maker and the leather industry raw materials pricing website, the Stahl Report. After I've given a brief introduction, I'm going to hand over today's webinar to our three presenters. I would like to acknowledge our webinar sponsors Stahl, and Michael Costello, Director of Sustainability at Stahl, will be one of our presenters today. This is the third webinar that ILM has broadcast around the hot topic of traceability and transparency in the leather supply chain, underlining what an important subject it is. Today we will have three different presenters from different parts of the supply chain offering new ideas and innovations around the central theme of traceability and transparency. International Leather Maker was established in 2013 when we realised there was a gap in the market for a media business that served the leather industry across several new media platforms, as well as print. ILM covers the global leather supply chain and is also published twice a year in Mandarin. Its website is updated several times daily with the latest industry news. Founded in 1985, the Stahl Report is an online raw materials pricing, analysis and trends website which is updated daily from a network of sources from around the world for its paid subscribers. It is a useful source of market information for the whole leather supply chain, including traders, tanners, brands and retailers, and associated suppliers. I would now like to introduce our three presenters. The first presentation will be made by Anne Gillespie, Director of Industry Integrity for the Textile Exchange. Her presentation is titled An Introduction to Responsible Leather and Credit Trading. The second presenter will be Michael Costello, Director of Sustainability at Stahl, who will present DNA marking applied to leather. The third presenter today is Fernando Bellese, Marketing and Sustainability Manager for JBS Couros, who will outline the traceability aspects of the company's new kind leather concept. I will now hand over the webinar to our first presenter, Anne Gillespie, Director of Industry Integrity for the Textile Exchange.
Right. Well, thank you, Martin and ILM, for inviting me to be part of this session. And I am Anne Gillespie from Textile Exchange, and I'm here to give you an introduction to the Responsible Leather Roundtable and talk about the impact credit system that we're developing to address some of the traceability challenges that we see in the supply chain. So very briefly, Textile Exchange is a non-profit organization. We've been around since 2002, and we really focus on driving sustainability in the textile value chain. We work in a number of areas. We focus very much on fibers and materials, and we have currently working on an initiative we're calling Responsible Leather, which is aimed at addressing the many issues that are found within the global leather supply chain. So we've set ourselves up as a roundtable where we can share information and learning, but the primary focus of the roundtable is to work on the Responsible Leather Assessment Tool, which is ultimately going to become a mechanism for brands to communicate their expectations back down the supply chain and deliver rewards in the form of either a premium on a product or through the credit trading system that I'm going to be speaking about. So within the tool itself, we have a benchmarking assessment tool that actually benchmarks best practices at the producer level, which in this case would mean the farmers, and also along the leather processing stages. So at the farm level, we're looking primarily at impacts around deforestation and animal welfare, but there's a lot of flexibility to build in more. We're very, very clear that we are working with all of the existing tools and programs and initiatives that are out there. We are not out there to create a standard ourselves. We're just trying to leverage what's being done and then add value to it through the assessment tool. And ultimately, we want to reward and influence the leather industry to incentivize those practices that respect animals, people, and the environment. We are not a standard, as I will reemphasize many times. We're working with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And they are another organization that shares a lot of our goals around addressing the different areas of impact in terms of the environmental impacts of production, of producing the animals, the animal welfare issues, social, etc. And they give us access to tens, if not hundreds of millions of farms. Because of their structure, they have roundtables distributed throughout the world, and they have a really strong voice with those farmers. If you look at it, when we're looking at the meat and the leather supply chain, I mean, we really do share the first part of the supply chain, from the cow-calf farm to the raising farms through the slaughter. And then we also share the same set of consumers. People eat meat, people wear leather, people drive on leather, they carry leather handbags, etc. So this is the area that the GRSB works with. The roundtable works on this side. And the GRSB has a very, very strong voice with the beginning of the supply chain. And that's because they represent the highest proportion of the value of the animal. Whereas we've got, as leather users, a relatively small voice, particularly if you're trying to make your way all the way back to the farm level. However, the beef industry has a kind of a smaller presence in the minds of the consumers. Apart from a few fast food chains, I don't think most consumers could tell you that many meat-related brands. Whereas when it comes to furnishings, apparel, footwear, automotive, then there's much more brand consciousness. So we've got a really big voice with consumers. So combined, by working together, we can really achieve some shared goals much more powerfully. So that was the background. And now I want to talk about traceability, which is really the subject of this overall webinar. So the gold standard that I think everybody is driving for ultimately is to have full supply chain traceability, so that they can make a very clear claim about the leather in my final product is sourced from a fully responsible supply chain, all the way back from the initial farm where the animal is raised through the processing stages and production. That has been the basis upon which we've built all of the other standards that Textile Exchange owns. We have the responsible down standard, responsible wool standard, the recycled standards, and the organic content standard. And we've been very, very successful. There's a big appetite among leather or textile product brands to use those full product claims. And that's when they first came to us, that's what they were looking for. But when we started to dig into the reality, to get that full supply chain traceability all the way back to the cow-calf farm is, in the best case, complex, time-consuming, and expensive, and in many cases almost impossible because of some of the areas where there's just kind of, frankly, laundering of cattle, or so many traders, or there's just not that traceability through the slaughterhouse. Now, I know that there are really excellent solutions that are being developed. And, in the end, through the Responsible Leather Initiative, we want to support all of those and ultimately help brands find access to all those fully sustainable or fully traceable supply chains. But right now, drawing on data that we have from the Leather Working Group, that traceability of the slaughterhouse and direct farm is theoretically possible in some countries, and in even fewer countries where it would actually be theoretically possible. So I know that as technology emerges, as programs develop, this will change. But what we're trying to do is find an immediate solution that will enable brands to connect back to better producers and to really incentivize the growth of better supply from better farms. So to do this, we're using impact credits. So first of all, what is an impact credit? If you think of the credit trading system like a carbon credit, where you don't know where your energy is coming from, but you buy a carbon credit, which would be green energy from some other location. It's essentially the concept that we're looking at. In this case, an impact credit will be referred to any certificates that are traded in support of a sustainability claim. And then we have to be sure that they're issued when a set of criteria have been met. And they will be traded independently of the physical trade of the goods. So this is the big diagram that shows where it's happening. This is conceptual only. We're already making some modifications because we're really in the development and design phase, working with the stakeholders from all parts of the various industries. But the idea would be that a farm would be verified to meet certain criteria. At this point, we're looking at deforestation-free and animal welfare criteria. Say this farm has 500 cows on it. The certification body would register them for 500 credits into the system. And then a meat brand and also even a leather brand would decide, okay, we are going to use credits. We cannot find the initial supply or the initial source of all of our materials. We don't have that level of traceability yet, but we do want to address the impacts of farming and support best practices. So we're going to buy credits. So this footwear brand might say, we're going to buy 300 credits. So they would go in, they would put an offer in. So this farmer might be asking for $10, they might offer $8, and in the end, they settle on $9. And then ultimately, this farmer would get $9 per cow. This final brand would be paying $9 per hide equivalent that they use. Those numbers are absolutely made up. I have no idea what the actual credits are going to be, but they are going to just flux up and down based on supply and demand. The other thing that we're looking to do is say that for all criteria, there must be either an ear tag or some form of traceability. It could be a DNA marker, it could be a certificate, like a transaction certificate style, so that we are ultimately going to enable that traceability all the way through to slaughter. And we can build up not only a supply of farms or of cattle from farms that are following best practices, but that are also traceable. So I'm including this slide just in case the slide deck is shared and people can reference this as to see it. But I'm going to go now into a few FAQs that get thrown at me all the time. So I'll start by talking about what is it that credits support. And in a very general sense, credits, it'll be up to the different NGOs to define what they support. Two very successful systems that are using the credit trading model are the Roundtable for Responsible Soy and the Roundtable for Responsible Palm Oil. Responsible palm oil now accounts for 20% of all palm oil that's traded. So they've been really successful in using this and driving the demand. So with responsible leather, we're setting up that benchmarking tool to set up what those expectations are. And here's where we're going with it. Currently, we're looking at saying at a minimum, all credits must have meet the deforestation and conversion-free criteria, and then also be part of some kind of a traceability system, whether it's an ear tag or something else. And then beyond that, they can add in other elements that we will have benchmarks for: animal welfare, social, could be water, etc. And then brands can decide to use the credits based on, there's a few strategies. One, they can just match to their sourcing regions. So if a brand is saying, they buy half of their credits from the United States and half from Brazil, then they'll buy half of their credits from the US and half from Brazil. And so the advantage of that is, it's defensible when they're talking about their strategy, and it also helps them build up a supply of responsible leather that they can ultimately link back to a physically traceable chain. Other brands may choose to really focus on their, sustainable development goals and bigger targets. They might have targets around biodiversity or carbon. And in that case, they might choose to buy the credits that are going to deliver the highest level of impact. So if you're focusing on biodiversity, you're going to want to be preventing deforestation, and you're going to look at the highest risk areas for deforestation, which would be in the Amazon or the Cerrado or the Chaco area. And then we're going to build in a fair amount of transparency into what those credits are, and hopefully data behind those credits, so the brands can really report back out on the impacts that they're achieving through the credit use, whichever strategy they use. And then of course they can do a mixed approach. So one of the initial challenges we get a lot of the time is, well, what if this is just supporting those that are already doing the right thing? And I've got two answers to that. One, I think that's fine. I mean, that's what any standard does, particularly in the early years. It basically gives assurance that farmers are following best practices, and brands can make credible claims about what they're sourcing or what they're supporting. And it's also really important to give value to those farmers that are already doing the right thing, so they will continue to do that, and then it will provide incentives for other farmers to follow that. But it's not the only thing that we're going to do, because ultimately we want to drive incremental change where it's really needed. So the way that we're looking to do that is to give transparency to the credits that are being traded. so that if a brand is saying, well, I just bought 10,000 credits, their stakeholders, whether it's investors, special interest groups, media, whoever, might start to challenge them and say, well, did you just buy the cheapest credits? Did you just buy them all from the United States, or because there is no deforestation there and that was really easy for you? I think the brands will be held to account to talk about their credits and be sure that they either match to their sourcing strategy or that they match to genuine impacts. So what are the benefits of the impact credits? Why are we going to this? Why don't we just go straight into those traceability solutions? Well, up until the time when those traceability solutions are available at a broad scale, the impact credits are a way to bypass the very long and complex supply chains, and also to address the price conundrum that often inhibits the wide-scale adoption of the traceability standards. So, we look at this supply chain. I'm sure most people on this call will be much more experts into a full supply chain than I am. But when you add in traders and possibly different farming systems and so on, different tanning stages, it can get very, very long and complex. And at the slaughterhouses, a lot of slaughterhouses have no interest in segregating and maintaining the identity of hides that come from better farms or responsible farms. So when you look at the traceability, in addition to the traceability systems, there's also the whole issue around pricing. The animals and then the hides move from one stage of ownership to the next. Everybody adds their markup, which is absolutely reasonable. But that markup is put onto the full cost of the input materials or whatever they're receiving. And if that includes a premium, that means the premium itself gets inflated. So whereas with the credit system, the money and the trade is directly from the end user, the brand, all the way back to the initial producer, there is really effectively no inflation. And this is just a theoretical example. Only the numbers are completely made up. But for the sake of illustration, if we started at a $1 premium to farmer with an identity preserved or chain of custody model, and if everybody along the supply chain put a 20% markup, that $1 would cost the brand $3.58. Or to look at the other way, if a brand paid a premium of $3.58, the farmer would only get $1. Whereas with the credit trading system, a $1 credit would probably cost the brand about $1.05. And there is a small amount that goes back to the NGO. In this case, for responsible leather, it would be Textile Exchange. For responsible beef, it would be the GRSB. But it is, you can see it's a much more efficient way of getting that money across. And ultimately, this is where I love to come back to the responsible palm oil example, is that it allows us to build a very big supply rapidly. So this is the annual sales of certified sustainable palm oil. You can see in 2008, the lighter orange is the growth through the credit trading system or book and claim. And then the darker orange is through identity preserved, segregated, or mass balance systems. And you can see that they achieved a lot of rapid, significant growth all the way through 2015, primarily through the use of the book and claim system, which is, like I said, efficient and relatively fast. But then what it did, it also allowed the industry to start organizing themselves, the supply chains, to have that greater traceability and support actual product claims. So by 2016, the majority was being sold through identity preserved or mass balance. And right now, I think RSPO accounts for between 23 and 25% of all palm oil. So it's significant in terms of what we can accomplish. I invite you to visit our website at responsibleleather.org or to contact us, responsibleleather@textileexchange.org. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Anne. That was really interesting. I will now hand over the webinar to our second presenter, Michael Costello, Director of Sustainability at Stahl.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Today I'd like to speak about this very interesting technology that's being used in many other industries, and to look at how it could be applied to leather and the relevance of that, and indeed the value of applying this technology to leather, what that could be. So if we look at the agenda, I'll just talk about 3 topics. It'll be about 10 slides, about 10 minutes. We'll introduce the DNA marking tagging concept and then look at how it could be used in leather manufacturing. We will just have leather manufacturing in scope today. I won't be discussing how it could be applied outside leather manufacturing, so not related to farming, for example. And then we'll see the value of this, what it could bring to the industry. So on the slide now, DNA tagging introduction. Really, the way I like to think of this DNA is it's really a barcode. It's like the barcodes that you see in supermarkets that carry information. But in this particular case, it's molecular. It's on a molecular basis. You don't see anything. But the information that the DNA carries can be equally large. You can put pretty much any kind of information in the DNA tagging about the product or about anything that you want. So that's the way I like to think of it, as a molecular barcode. It's already used in many different industries around the world, this very same technology. It's used in crime, of course, forensic science, but also in security systems, in ATMs, for example, for cash, recycled plastics, pharmaceuticals, even cannabis, and textiles and printing inks, which is more related to the leather industry. So it is used in also quite similar industries already. Typically, the desired purpose and the reason for using DNA tagging is to do with provenance and origin of a product. People want to find out where the product came from, where it started, and even the traceability, what happened to it during its manufacture, what kind of things were done to it during its manufacture. But of course, that can be extended out to counterfeiting and even verification of claims such as sustainability. That could also be considered a use or a function of the DNA tagging. And just before we get into how it works, I just wanted to note, in case there was any questions about this, is it safe? Because the DNA is a liquid. It's a product that comes in liquid form. It's highly diluted, by the way. It's in nanogram quantities, tiny, tiny amounts. But it is what's called a non-functional nucleic acid fragment, which means that it's not toxic, basically. It has been tested and it is used in food grade applications like inks and, of course, pharmaceuticals, approved by the FDA for those uses. It's not cancer causing and it's not infective. And indeed, it has been assessed by a GRAS third party, which is approved by the FDA as generally recognized as safe. So it is very safe, especially if its carrier is safe, of course. And often the carrier can be water. So how does it work? Well, step one, generally, you have to define what the desired purpose is. What do you want the DNA to do? What functionality do you want it to have? Because it can be designed for different functionalities. And of course, it can be designed to contain different types of information. For example, traceability, that's quite a popular one for leather in terms of what we think it could be used for in leather. Then you do the assigning of the molecular tag, which means that you choose from the DNA types that you have and you use the one that's most appropriate to what you're looking for. And you fill that with information required. And then the third step and final step is to formulate the DNA into the product with the carrier. Yeah, so that's basically how it works. And then, of course, further along the line, after months or years, then that DNA can be detected and used for authentication, which we'll get into in a couple of minutes. Yeah, so that's very simply how it works. In leather, DNA tags like this can be added to different parts of the leather process, and they have been proven to be detected later. In wet blue, wet white formulations, it can be put into the final rinse, for example, after initial tanning. And that has been proven to be detected after. It can be put into the crust leather after retanning and dyeing, and of course it can be formulated into finishing, for example, water-based polyurethanes. So these are things that have actually been tested already, not commercial, but they have been done, and this is possible. Of course, there's still a lot more research to be done in this area. In particular, there is interest, of course, in having the DNA added into the even earlier parts of the leather process, like beam house. But that hasn't been tested yet, and that would be part of the project. It's typically introduced into floats and chemicals in water. It's a water-based diluted product. It comes as a concentrate and then it's diluted and is introduced that way into the leather systems. And of course, the leather and the chemicals can be traced and authenticated once this has been done. A comment about the performance and aging, because obviously there's some concern perhaps that the DNA would not survive some of the processing or even some of the aging characteristics of leather, which would be necessary. So far, we've seen that when DNA tags have been used in wet blue or wet white floats or introduction, they are showing good long-term stability. Of course, we don't have years of stability work done yet, but when we have accelerated testing, so far so good. And they can in the wet blues after splitting or shaving. When it comes to crust, there has been accelerated UV aging and Veslic rub testing done, and it has been detected after those tests. And similarly for finishing, we have been able to detect the tags in water-based polyurethanes after accelerated testing and abrasion. So what about authentication? How does it work? Well, basically you want to authenticate a piece of leather that contains the tags or not. It's a simple portable swab test. So you can actually go to the location required. You don't have to send samples to a central location to get this done. You can swab the leather on the surface, and then you can have those samples tested for DNA, if necessary, on site, or they could be sent back to a central lab. But there is a very easy to use portable device which can be brought to the location, and the testing can be done in the location using this portable device on the left. And that device also allows information to be uploaded into the central system based on what was found during that swab test. And then more detailed and complete testing could then be done in the certified laboratory. In this case, it's an Applied DNA laboratory. Applied DNA Sciences is the company providing the DNA in this particular case study. So what could be the benefits to leather? Well, I think there's many, of course. There's many things we could do with this. It allows genuine items to be distinguished from counterfeits, of course. If you put the tag into the genuine items, genuine leather, then that could be a way to distinguish it from counterfeits, if that was required. The origin and journey of the leather throughout the leather process can be traced, of course. If you're able to put the tags into different process steps, then that can be traced back and discovered and authenticated, which could be useful, of course. And you can prove that the leather has been sourced from an accredited supplier. For example, if you wanted to prove that your leather was coming from a leather working group rated supplier, then you could do that using this DNA tagging. Or any other accredited body, you could do the same thing using the tags. And I think that is quite an important point, probably one of the ones that will be researched further, of course. And of course, chemicals themselves could be traced to their source. What I mean by that is the chemical supplier. You could find out that the chemical was coming from this supplier. You could get a lot number of that chemical, its date of manufacture. You could even have information in the tag showing its status with regard to MRSL. For example, there's many other kinds of information you could get in the tag from the chemical supplier. So many benefits, and probably there's a longer list than that that we could think of. And just a note to finish up about the company who we're working with on this project. We signed a memorandum of understanding with them a couple of weeks ago, and there was a press release about that. This is a company based in the USA, and they are the largest producer of what they call PCR-based DNA. This is a special type of chain DNA, and they are the largest producer in the world of that type of DNA. Very innovative, interesting company, and we're working with them on how we could test and apply and the possibilities of using this technology in leather chemicals and in the leather industry to improve perhaps traceability, origin, etc. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mike, for your interesting presentation. I will now hand over the webinar to our third presenter, Fernando Bellese, Marketing and Sustainability Manager at JBS Couros.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, ILM, for for the invitation. It's good to be here and present a little bit of our projects, and more especially talk about kind leather and traceability. For those who don't know JBS, we are a food company. Before making leather, we make food and we sell food all over the world. So we always been involved with a lot of projects related to sustainability, the way we deal with our suppliers, how we can monitor farms, how we can work against deforestation, improve animal welfare. So there are a lot of projects being developed. What I want to share with you is how we, in JBS Couros, which is the leather division of JBS, how we can also add projects related to sustainability in our supply chain to be sure that not only we benefit from what the group does, JBS as a whole, in terms of monitoring animal welfare, but also add good practices in our production to deliver a better leather, a more sustainable leather to our customers. The starting point of this project, we thought that we had to choose some more important pillars that we should focus and try to add more value to our customers. So we started with responsible sourcing, and here by responsible sourcing we are talking about the monitoring of the farm selling to JBS. We are talking about combating deforestation, but we are also talking about animal welfare. Then we thought about traceability. This is something that it's really part of our daily routine, but it's important that we deliver a strong traceability to our customers. And then we have the topic of eco-efficiency. Leather is a resource-intensive industry, and we need to keep focusing and getting more efficient and producing more using less resources. So just as talking about each of these pillars, when we talk about monitoring of farms, we in JBS we have a pioneering system that overlaps satellite images with public data and geo-referenced information from the farm selling to JBS. So the computer is able to visually identify if any of the farms supplying to JBS, if they are inside overlapping indigenous areas, protected areas, or if they had any deforestation since 2009. If that's the case, those farms, they are blocked automatically, and our procurement team is not able to buy from those farms. So it's a very efficient way when we deal with a large scale, when we are buying from more than 80,000 farms, which is what we do. And it's been shown very good results so far. In the last 3 years, we run independent audits every year, and the results we achieved in the last 3 years, they were above 99%. So it's a 99% of efficiency rate. So it means that from all the sampling done by the auditing company, we had an efficiency rate of 99% when they compare the results of our monitoring program against our policy, which says that we shouldn't buy from deforested areas, we shouldn't buy from farms involved in invasion of indigenous areas and protected areas. We shouldn't buy from farms involved with any other rural conflict. So that's how we measure our efficiency. In terms of animal welfare, I think this is one of the hottest topics in our industry. Consumers are asking more and more to understand how we can ensure better practices in terms of handling of animals. There are pressure from NGOs, so we need to be able to answer this in an efficient way. And the way we start, we gotta have clear criteria and indicators. Our policy follows the 5 animal freedoms, so we know clearly how we can measure animal welfare. Then we start creating indicators so we can compare the operations in our different facilities. Only in Brazil, we have more than 30 facilities, so it's a lot of units dealing with animals. And by comparing the performance on those units, we can see which ones are doing better, why they are doing better, and we can drive improvement in other facilities. We also do a lot of training. We train from the driver picking up animals all the way to the people involved in handling of animals, all the way to the slaughtering. And by doing that, by having indicators, by training our people, we know where the gaps are and where we got to invest and where we can still improve our practices. And this is what is related to our practice inside our company. But then we need to be able to engage our suppliers to communicate best practices. And we do that often. being it through trainings direct with our suppliers, being it through creation of booklets, manuals that talks about animal welfare, working with TV channels, magazines in order to really communicate and improve those practices, not only in our company, but throughout the supply chain. And also we try to engage with independent initiatives to assess our practice. And we've been in the last few years engaged with the business benchmark for animal welfare, and we are always rated among the best companies in that area. Then another important pillar is traceability. Traceability is a matter of continuous improvement. It's a matter of product safety. It's a matter of also understanding where your products come from. It's how we can connect the final product we deliver to our customers back to the slaughtering and group of farms we buy from. But I'm going to get more in details in a bit. I just want to talk a little bit more about other topics, and then I'll come back to traceability. And in this project here that we are presenting today, there is something that is really unique in what we've been working here. From the last 2 years, we've been researching how can we see a hide in a different way, how we can see it as a source of protein, valuable protein, and identify the best use for that hide. So we decided that we should make leather only in the area that's really meant to be leather, and areas that normally you have a more defects, areas where you have lower cutting yield, you should use to other industries. So we reshaped leather, and now we are trimming, we are cutting, we are splitting from line. So we start processing only the area that's interesting to us, to our customers, and the rest we are sending to other industries. So you can work with squarish hides when you buy this new concept we are working with. And what are the advantages here? You have the traceability I mentioned before, the monitoring of the farms, the animal welfare, but still in an environmental perspective, this new approach, this new shape help us to reduce considerably the waste, the trimmings in the process. We use a lot less chemicals. We have a reduced carbon footprint. We reduce the amount of water. So it's really a good thing when you consider the environmental perspective. In a business perspective, it's also something very important because it gives us higher productivity. When you have a more squared shaped hide, you can feed more hides to the machine, so you have a faster processing, you can gain in productivity. You also have a better cutting yield. We tested in many cutting rooms, not only inside JBS, but also in other companies, and we had improved yield by using those squared hides. And then you have also the social benefit. If you're working with a more regular hide, a lighter hide, because you trimmed a lot of those unwanted areas for the leather processing, it's easier for our staff to move hides around, to feed the machines. They have better ergonomics, they reduce the efforts needed, so it's interesting for our people to work with those hides. And then we have what we say a new approach to the processing of the hide. It's really using only what is important for leather processing, and the rest from the start we send it to other industries such as health and beauty, pharmaceutics, food industries, so they can add value to those industries and they don't sometimes become an unwanted part of leather because they are less efficient in the leather processing. I'm talking what this means. We call this project Kind Leather. So we named this project because it's important that people identify it's a concept. It's not a product. This can be applied to wet blue, to our crust, to our finished leather. So we think if we name it, it's easier for our customers to identify. By doing this reshaping, this new concept in leather processing, we were able to reduce in 46% the amount of water used to tan those hides, which is really relevant. And why that? It's because all those areas which we removed, we don't need to process those areas anymore. So you save a lot of water. Same thing for chemicals. We reduce in 42% the amount of chemicals used for tanning the hides. When you're talking about finishing the hides, this is also interesting because you have squared shaped hides, you can put them closer to each other. You avoid having all those irregular areas of a normal leather, and that makes sure that when you are in a spraying line, more chemicals that you are spraying into the hide is going to the hide and not into the wastewater, because you get rid of all those irregular areas that sometimes affects the efficiency. So this gives us an increase in efficiency in 9%, and in the end it allows us to use 28% less chemicals in the finishing stage. And then the final point, which is interesting in kind leather, we run some tests in different partners. One of them is Lectra. We send hides to their technology center in Bordeaux so they could compare how kind leather performs in a cutting room in comparison to a standard leather. So we did this for the automotive industry. So we are using it to cut automotive kits. And what we found in these tests is that kind leather yields between 8 to 10 percentage points better yields than other materials. How does that happen? How does it get more efficient? If you get a standard leather in this project, we use the same patterns for both the standard leather and kind leather. The cutting yield in a standard leather for this project is 66.44%, which maybe not high, but it's an average yield. It means that in the end, over 33% is going to waste. Then we start measuring only the outer part of the leather, which we get rid at the beginning of the process of kind leather to understand what's the cutting yield of that part. And in that part, we realized that the cutting yield on that outer area was only 23%. So it means in that area specifically, 76% of that area was going to waste. So what's the point in putting water there, energy, chemicals, if you're going to throw most of that area away? So what we focus is really reshaping the hide so we can have a higher yield, and we work only on the premium area of leather. So this is the concept of kind leather. And this is a summary of some of the things I mentioned to you. So you have a reduced emission of CO2, lower consumption of water, energy, chemicals, and something that's important to a lot of our customers. The amount of trimmings you generate in the whole process reduces by half, which in the end of the day is less waste you are sending to landfill. But now we need to go back a little bit to traceability, which is the main topic of this webinar. I mentioned that traceability is what connects the whole thing. It helps us to understand the origin of the materials, but also it gives, we say, the whole DNA of that hide, because it gives more details about the entire processing. And how does it work in JBS? We have a concept that we call net concept, because it's really like a net with a lot of different links. You have one dimension of the traceability, which is more related to the origin. So it allows us to trace back the hides from our customers all the way to the group of farms supplying to our processing facilities, but also allow us to have in-depth view of the process, of the whole flow. So we know that the processes that the hide went through, the people who operated the machines, we know that the working flows, the equipment applied, all the chemicals, the batch of those chemicals. So it really gives us an in-depth picture of the whole thing, which is important because a lot of times in our industry, traceability is a matter of understanding if that hide comes from areas that are not involved with deforestation, not involved with environmental issues at the slaughtering farm level. But for us, it's a lot more important than that. It's about quality. It's about ensuring you know how you are doing your leather and that you have accountability for that. So as I mentioned, we have two levels. One is the horizontal, and the other one is the vertical approach of traceability. The horizontal, it's what we say from customer to group of farms. So we know our finished leather, where it was finished, where it was retained, where it was tanned, the slaughterhouse where the fresh hides came from. And because the tannery and the slaughterhouse is the same company, we are able also to go back to the group of farms. And then we have the net concept, which is a lot more complex than the horizontal. We are not talking about the origin here, but we are talking about being able to understand a lot of different information. So about all the inputs, the chemicals, the raw materials used, the machinery applied, all the settings for those machines. I can go back and see, okay, for invoice X, we produced 500 hides using machine W, and for that machine, we had these specific settings. So whenever you have an issue in your product, we can go back, we can review our processes, we can improve it. If there's any questions from your customer, we can investigate, see if there was any issues from our side that needs to be improved, or we can even give you the right information for you to be protected and confident about the product you are buying for. And it's important to mention all our tanneries are LWG audited, and they have a 100% score in traceability, which is the maximum score you can achieve. When I'm talking about all this information, this is made through our ERP system, and we can access this information through the bill of lading, through the invoicing, the packing list. So there are a lot of information that we provide to you as a customer that we can go back and trace back to all this information I'm sharing in the screen. But when I talk about the horizontal traceability, we have a very simple system, but which is very efficient. It's a stamp that we put in the raw hide and which give us the origin. So we know by this set of characters here, we know where the animal was slaughtered, the day of the slaughtering, the day that the leather was processing. And because we have this information here, we can also go back and find the group of farms that were involved in that leather batch. So we can put the number of the slaughterhouse we have and when the animals were processed. This would give us a list of farms where the hide came from. It does not link one hide to one farm, but it links the hide to a group of farms that the animals came from on that specific day in that specific processing facility. And why that's important? Because by doing that, by having the group of farms, you are able to check if those farms were involved with any of the issues we mentioned before. By this way, you have not only insurance of the origin, but also you have a completely control of your processes. So that's it. That's kind leather, and that's traceability inside JBS. I hope you like, and if you have any questions, you can follow them to me. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Fernando. We are now going to do the Q&A session with our three presenters. You can post a question to any of the presenters using the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. Those that are not covered today will be forwarded onto the presenters and they will respond to you. So let's begin by asking our presenters some questions. Anne, are there, in your opinion, any opportunities for the leather industry to work more closely with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef?
Oh, absolutely. We're forming a really tight relationship. And in fact, the development of the credit trading system is being done with them. And we're looking at how to set the same mechanisms and really align the principles around what the baseline requirements are going to be for the producers. And then beyond that, I think we're also trying to look at how do we overall use our combined influence to really drive those best practices at the producer level. We held a conference in Ireland last year, and it was a joint responsible leather and sustainable beef conference. They had theirs, we had ours, and then we overlapped. And I think that really set up the groundwork for a lot of collaboration. So I'm now a member of their organization, and they are involved in a lot of our groups.
Okay, thank you. Going back to your presentation, how realistic do you think it may be in the future for there to be sort of full traceability from the farm through to sort of finished leather products? Do you think it's a realistic goal?
I don't know if we would see it happen everywhere. I think the technologies and the systems for traceability will continue to develop and grow in use, but it will really be a question of what kind of demand for full traceability is there and what are the brands willing to pay in order to achieve that. And if all of that's in place, then I think the systems and the technology will eventually be able to support that. And going back to the credit trading system, that really exists to start building that supply so that when those demand signals start going through, there are that really large pool of farms that can meet the expectations of the brands.
Okay, thank you. Talking about the impact credit system that you mentioned in your presentation, Is this a thing that's in development at the moment, or are there brands and other organisations trialling this with farmers? What's the timeline for this sort of technology at the moment?
It's absolutely in the initial stages of development. We are working both on the credit trading system and the mechanisms for that, as well as the benchmarking tool and how that will work. So I'm fortunate, I'm working very closely with Solidaridad, the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, World Wildlife Fund. We've got some very good players that are feeding into the design side. But our ultimate goal, if we keep everybody moving forward at a fast pace, is to have a draft ready by our annual conference. Textile Exchange has an annual conference in Vancouver on October 18th, the Friday. We're going to have a full day summit on responsible leather, and we hope to present the draft of the tool at that point.
Thanks very much, Anne. Mike, can I ask, how long do you feel it will be until a fully traceable and commercially viable system using these DNA markers will be up and running?
Well, I think it depends on how detailed we want to get with the markers, and if we want to use them throughout the whole leather process, or we want to start with certain points in the process. I think we're some time away from investigating every single step of the process and whether that can be done. But we're talking probably a few years until a fully traceable and commercially viable system would be up and running, but we're starting on it and we're working on it. Obviously, there's some chemical input here. We need to check that the DNA can withstand the rigors of the leather process and indeed how long out it can survive. And this is still quite new. So we have done aging testing, but not for 10 years yet because it hasn't been around for that long. So I think we're still a little bit away from that, but certainly there appears to be a commercially viable system available already from applied DNA. So it's just a question of getting that into the leather process using chemistry and using some innovative methods. So yeah, still a little bit of time to go, but viability I think is there, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I noticed from your presentation that currently there is a gap in traceability use DNA markers where they're unable to withstand the sort of current beam house chemical operations in the leather making process. Obviously at Stahl, as the world's largest leather chemical supplier, do you see there are new chemistries and technologies in the pipeline where these DNA markers could survive through beam house processes and allow for a full to sort of farm to finished leather product traceability? And if so, what can we expect to see in the future?
Yeah, I think we haven't investigated beam house enough to know whether it can withstand or not adding in at that stage. You know, there just hasn't been enough initial work done, and that's what we're starting. So to say that it cannot withstand the rigors of the beam house process, we don't know that yet. But it may be true given what happens during the beam house, of course, and after with the tanning. So we just haven't got there yet. If there's any specific new technology that we know can withstand this during beam house, also we don't know because we don't know if the existing technology works or not. But we do understand that probably that will be the more difficult side. And we also need to understand, will that be necessary also, depending on what the market wants. Do they want traceability or provenance all the way through the system? Probably yes. But not necessarily. So we're starting in the areas where we know the DNA can be used and has been detected and can be commercially viable relatively quickly. But yes, we will have to look into beam house in more detail as we go forward. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Mike. Okay, Mike, that's very interesting. Just sort of in the scope of this project, have you investigated using this technology on sort of live animals on the farm, such as sort of cattle or sheep?
I think there has been some work done on this, not by us, of course, because we're not in the DNA business, but the DNA companies have done some work on this. And I don't know the status of that. But for this particular project that we're working on, the scope is not that. The scope is the leather process from when the hides arrive at the tanneries to when they leave the tannery. So that's the area that we're focused on. But of course, there are possibilities of having tagging done before that, but it's not in the scope of this project.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. Fernando, just wanted to ask, through the satellite tracking, has JBS been able to observe any illegal deforestation taking place? And what happened after a farm was identified illegal activities in Brazil?
This is an interesting question, Martin, because there are some points that we have to make it clear. Sometimes the farmer is not illegally deforesting. There is an allowance that a farm can deforest, but if it's against our policy, we block anyway. So it's just I want to make sure that not every time we block somebody, it's because they are doing something illegal, but it's because of public commitment that we don't buy from deforested areas. But now what happens a lot of times, if this farm in a case where they are deforesting where they were not supposed to, if they are doing something that is out against our policy, they are able to work in mitigation actions. They are able to start a dialogue with the Ministry of Environment, and if we see the right actions were taken, if we see that there were issues, for example, invasion of protected areas, if we see that those issues were fixed, they were get agreed with the Ministry of Environment, then they can become suppliers again. Because in the end of the day, we don't want to block people from the rest of their business life. It's a matter of continuous improvement. So if we see that a problem was fixed and this is official, this is recognized by the official agencies, we are able to start buying again from them.
Thank you. With end-to-end traceability, are you also able to trace cut leather parts?
We don't work with cut parts. We normally sell the leather in as finished, as crust. We have a very small cutting facility, but which is not part of our main business. So normally we sell the hides to our customers. So to say that we can trace back cut parts, it depends what our customers can do. If they are able to trace their cut parts to the original invoice where it came from, or to the original packing list it came from, then we are able to go to our ERP, insert that information in our ERP, and then we can trace back the information I mentioned in my presentation.
Okay, thank you. And I've one final question. Is there a cost associated with full hide traceability to the end consumer? And do you think the benefits outweigh the costs?
There is a cost associated with traceability for sure. You have people, for example, just to stamp the hides. You have special parts of our ERP that had to be written to support the traceability. So there is a cost, but that cost is embedded in our production, in our system already. So I wouldn't say that an extra cost to our clients. Now, I'm not talking here about final consumers, but I don't think there's an added cost to our customers. However, when you talk about final consumers, then you are talking about a different issue, because not only we would have to have traceability, but our customers using our leather would also need to have a traceability system when they are doing the final product, being it a shoe or a furniture or a upholstered seat in a car. But they would have to be able to trace their entire process and link that to our information. So in the end of the day, you have a cost involved in all that thing, but it depends. It's a business case, how you want to build that case. One last point, which I think it's important to mention, Martin, because there are a lot of discussions many times. When we talk about traceability, it doesn't mean necessarily that every hide you're going to get a package with the full information, such as explaining the origin, explaining the chemicals used, explained the process applied. One, because you have industrial confidentiality in a lot of those informations. And the second, because the amount of information when you talk about this kind of traceability is huge. Sometimes to get all this information from one invoice, from one batch, your computer has to process, you're talking about hours processing that information. Traceability is more about knowing you can do those things and that you can, when you need, revisit that information. It's not that the information is going to be going forward all the time, because companies wouldn't be able to deal with all that information, and they wouldn't have a use for that information, every single hide coming with that package of information. It's more about, let's say, one day customer A wants to change the touch of his materials. We can go back, see the formulation, see the chemicals, and revisit the whole process. Or one day he's questioned about the origin of his material, so he can give us the stamp and we'll trace all the way back to the group of farms. But it's about the availability of information.
Indeed. Okay, well, thank you very much, Fernando. I would now like to conclude the webinar today by thanking our three excellent presenters for sharing their knowledge and insights on this topic. I would also like to thank Stahl once again for sponsoring the webinar, and we will be posting the full webinar online soon in case there was any aspects you would like to see again. A link to the recording will be sent out. Finally, you will now be asked a short survey about the webinar today and provide feedback so we can make sure we are offering content that is of genuine interest. ILM will be hosting more free-to-view webinars in the future, so keep an eye out for the future topics on the ILM website. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.